And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here. UFO News Network Sunday, a special 2018 year in review roundtable. It was pretty much the year of the To the Stars Academy, the ATIP program, and everything surrounding that. Some other things happened here and there, but it was pretty much their year. They pretty much dominated just about all the major news in the field over the last year, and there's no sense in denying it. We're going to tackle it and go basically from coast to coast. Let's bring in a great panel we've got for everybody today. We've got, well, I'll start going west to east. We got pretty much half the world covered. All the way out west from the wild, wild west, Chant Hanna, UFO investigative journalist, doing interviews. Most recently, I saw the one with Irina Scott. You also introduced some guy named Dave Beaty, who I didn't know that much about, but learned a lot more reading your interview, and some MUFON state directors as well. Welcome aboard, Chant. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And this is your rookie year in all this. Is that about right? You're just getting active in proactively going out and asking questions about UFOs and sharing it online.
Yeah, I think it's important for the average UFO enthusiast to learn as much as possible. And, you know, you have your very serious UFO researchers out there, but there's a lot of people who want to learn more about this topic. And so what I do is I try and interview as many people who are serious in the field of ufology as possible so that we can educate everybody about this topic, being
awesome.
ufology.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And all the way from Winnipeg, Grant Cameron. Grant, you've obviously not a rookie anymore at all this, but you've had a pretty good 2018, I would say. You've had a great 2018. Thanks for coming back on board with us, Grant Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. It was it was an exciting year. It sort of felt good. It sort of felt a little bit of vindication for what I've been saying for so many years. Everything seems to be going along the way I thought it was going to happen. So it was a good year, and it looks like a better year coming.
Certainly hope so. One question for you, Grant. You started actively researching all this a number of years ago. Would you say this is your best year in the field since you started?
Hard to say.
You've had some other good years.
To me, it's sort of it's a matter of inspiration, whether I think I've sort of figured it out. And I think as it goes along, every year gets better where I have less and less questions. As you know, I started in 75 where I saw something and all I wanted to know after everybody rejected my manuscript was what's going on. And I think I don't have that many questions anymore as to what's going on.
Okay, great. And all the way from Florida, Dave Beaty. Dave, UFO researcher, obviously, a MUFON investigator back in the day, and the producer of the Nimitz Chronicles. Dave, you've had a really good year, too.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I think we have to say this would probably be one of the best years for me in this field. But then again, I have been out of it for quite the while, and I did kind of just get back into it when this all broke last December. So it kind of, I would say it's probably the best year.
And in your wildest dreams, your Nimitz Encounters documentary over on YouTube, in roughly a month, you're pushing 1 million views already. Dave, did you, in your wildest dreams, did you anticipate that kind of response?
You know, it was completely surprising to me. I have no idea how that occurred, how that it reached that many people. I mean, there must have been a share by somebody that had a lot of followers. That's all I can think of. Or a lot of people are interested in this topic. So I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm very happy that it did. So
Sure, absolutely. And you've got some news for us, and we're going to talk in a little bit more detail because obviously just last month, November, that's when it was released, and we're going to try to review the year in chronological order. But I know you've got plenty of stuff because you've been working all this throughout the year. And all the way from England, we've got Twitter user Jay. Jay, thanks for coming back on with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with people that I've been following for a long time. You know, Grant Cameron, I think, is a bit of a legend in the area. And Dave and Chant as well. So it's going to be really, really great. Thanks for the invite. I apologise in advance. I've got a bit of a cold.
Okay.
So you have to just sort of see through that.
Fantastic. No, you sound fine. You sound great. Jay, you're basically a rookie in all this too, as far as proactive UFO research and sharing your information. Talk about your rookie year a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I got involved in this stuff starting June this year. You know, it's kind of always been something I've been interested in for 20 odd years. I'm coming up for 40 in just a few months. So, you know, it's been there for a little while, but only really introduced myself to the community in June when I signed up to Twitter and made a little splash with the Mellon leak, finding these documents like Lou Elizondo's.
We got a lot of questions. We got a lot of questions about that for you when we get into that. That's going to be a lot of fun because I'm not too clear on that, so I've got quite a few questions for you. And let us go back. Basically, this idea. It's a real shame that James isn't here because the idea to do this show was James's baby. He wanted to talk about this, and a lot of the notes that I've shared with you from some of the key events throughout the year. He put a lot of that together. So. Obviously, it's a big disappointment that James isn't with us, but the show must go on. So basically, a year ago, this Sunday, a year ago, the New York Times broke that huge story revealing the ATIP program, revealing the names of some of the senators involved, including most famously Harry Reid, who was doing a little bit of talking about it as well. Simultaneously with all that, two videos, a FLIR video and a gimbal video. One of them confirmed to be from the famous Nimitz encounter, the other from a somewhat hazier encounter that we've since tracked down as something happening off the east coast of the U.S. In 2015, I believe it is. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, that's what we believe. You know, it hasn't ever been announced anywhere aside from our group and a couple of the researchers there that believe that those videos were filmed off the coast of Florida, actually, not far from me, off the coast of Daytona, in a training area where they were doing similar workups that the Nimitz was doing. And this would be the USS Roosevelt strike group. And it's believed that that was filmed in the month of January. So
Got it. Okay, well, the story breaks. I know I woke up that Sunday morning and I couldn't believe it. I'm trying to save links and keep information together and tabulate it and share it. And it was an extraordinary day. Grant Cameron, you've been on all this a while, but the actual story itself, when it broke, the coordinated media attack by whoever wants to get this information out came down, and that was there for all the world to see it. Were you surprised it happened that way on that particular day?
Well, I was surprised and I wasn't surprised because I had actually written Managing Magic. It had been released in February, about maybe almost a year before, and I had predicted that Tom DeLonge and Jim Semivan and all these guys were doing this. I had been told that they were going to do this. But if you remember, the way it broke was Hillary was supposed to do this. It was going to be Hillary and Podesta, and Obama had green-lighted this thing. And because Hillary lost the election, there was all this delay. So when the thing actually broke December the 16th, if you recall, even Tom DeLonge was very frustrated. A couple days before the actual release in these media, Tom DeLonge had posted and said, "Ugh, you know, like, oh, another delay," and it was almost like he'd given up too, and he was taking a lot of hits on his, you know, his various media, that he was a big scam artist and this is all garbage and nothing was going to happen. So when it happened, I went, oh, finally, they finally, because I'd been talking to people on the inside and they kept saying, it's coming, don't worry, it's coming. And so when it broke, I just basically said, this is disclosure. This is what we've sort of been waiting for, this confirmation. And my first step was immediately to go to Ron Pandolfi. So I went through Dan Smith and I immediately said, what's Ron got to say? And so it started that whole thing that I believe that they were part of this. And but I said, basically, this is disclosure. And I still maintain that basically it's over. I mean, it's unraveling now. And from what I hear now, it's just going to be more unraveling. And people will say, you know, there was no disclosure. And I'm going, it depends what your definition of disclosure. Disclosure means to reveal, and that is the biggest reveal. I mean, I've been at it since '74. There's nothing even close to this. There's been a lot of rumors that this is going to happen, but I mean, it was an absolutely major event, and yet it falls into what I said. It's not full disclosure. It's not, they're going to tell you everything. It started with the 3 newspapers, 2 of them using one name and 1 of them using the other. All of them would have had 2 sources inside the Pentagon who were confirming to them this is for real. And so it was still this game of gradually, mess up the story, leak it out. But to me, it was December 16th was basically disclosure on a Saturday morning when you shouldn't be releasing anything. Like 39 years after December 17th, when they shut down Blue Book. So there's all these different connections, but very, very significant. The most significant event, and it is disclosure. Nobody jumped off a roof. Nobody committed suicide. There was no run on the stock market. Nothing happened. Everybody just went, oh, okay.
Well, Dave, that morning when all that broke, were you working on your documentary at that point, or was this a catalyst for you?
No, it was totally a catalyst. I really, again, hadn't been involved in the community as much, and as Grant knew about this, Tom DeLong and the whole thing in advance, I hadn't really known too much about it, so I had a lot of catching up to do. And reading that article that morning and the subsequent articles in the Washington Post and so on, it was startling to me. I mean, I could not believe I was reading this in a major American newspaper, and then globally, it's usually not even covered, or it's on the back page or a tabloid or something. And it was being taken seriously, and it was being discussed. I think this had one of the most profound effects on their website. I believe that the New York Times website, it was one of their most successful articles. And so, yeah, that was really the starting point for me of starting to conceptualize doing a visual representation of that one event that was mentioned in the New York Times. And that's the Nimitz part.
Right. Chant, did this particular event get your attention when it was happening, or was it more a case of the attention that followed kind of drew you in?
Well, I think the point that was just made about how it was disclosed on a Saturday morning, when people would be very relaxed and not really noticing anything, is important. That's how I kind of feel about it. I don't mean to sound so nonchalant, but I honestly believe if there's full disclosure, people really will have the same response. So that's quasi-disclosure right there. That's exactly what happened. There was a lack of response by the general public. I mean, to a degree. Serious UFO researchers, they were very passionate about it, as they should be. And, all of us in the UFO community that follow these kinds of stories, we were very excited about it, thrilled, in fact. But the rest of the world just seemed to continue, doing their normal everyday routine.
Got it. And Jay, did this get your attention on day one, or did the follow-up attention kind of draw you into all this?
Yeah, it was pretty much exactly the stuff. It's on the day. So as soon as it got released, checking out all the videos, I wasn't familiar with any of it beforehand. I know that there was some of the videos floating around for the Nimitz incident for a few years beforehand, but I'd never heard of them. So yeah, it was all new to me, but it was all fascinating. I think some of the videos have a bit more to them. Like the Nimitz one is quite an interesting one, and the gimbal is quite interesting. I think there's some valid criticism for the Go Fast video, which I know came a bit later. But yeah, I was essentially new to it all, but obviously absolutely fascinated me straight from day one.
Got it. Fascinated a lot of other people. There was a lot of media coverage outside the immediate big news sources like the New York Times, and Politico was involved right from the get-go. But some other mainstream entities were picking this up. There were some interviews getting done on the various national level news channels here in the States. I know one story that really got my attention in the immediate aftermath was a story in Scientific American, which never does UFO stuff, but there they are covering it, and a fairly in-depth interview with Steve Justice, who's with the To the Stars Academy, recently retired from the aerospace industry. So that this story got a lot of people's attention, especially in the media. There's no doubt about that. Any other stories, any other things that you read that got your attention in the immediate aftermath that stands out for you? Anybody?
Well, before we leave this subject, I did just want to give credit to Twitter Jay for not having revealed the female pilot's name and information, her background regarding the Nimitz UFO case.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in lots of detail when we get around to August, correct, Jay?
What? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right after that, between Christmas and another thing that happened, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. We got so much to cover here. Suddenly, mainstream media was asking questions once at the General Press Conference, which Huckabee Sanders runs. That was asked, and she didn't have an answer at that point. Was going to get back to the gentleman who asked the question. And then while Trump was leaving to go away on the holidays, one screamed question from the press crowd. And of course, presidents never answer those questions no matter what they are. They always keep going, they're running to or from the helicopter, whatever they're doing. But that got in there too. Grant, I know you had some thoughts at the time about how all that played out.
Yeah, well, I still maintain that the president knows, and you're not going to drag the president in because it just leads to another 5,000 questions and 3,000 reporters. So that's where Sanders said she actually told the reporter from the Hill, who was the guy asked the question, that she knew the question might be coming, but she didn't think anybody would ask the UFO question. And his question, of course, was, what does Donald Trump think about UFOs, and will he refinance the ATIP program? And she said, I haven't talked to the president. I'll talk to him. I'll get back to you. And I knew she wouldn't. And I tried to contact the reporter, and he wouldn't. But on the 16th story, there's two things I'd like to point out that people keep overlooking. And that is the fact that the 16th story, these were stories that took 2 months to unravel. So all these various media were coordinated. And I was told it was Jim Semivan who had coordinated the whole thing. And they all went on the same day of this long, involved story. And then on the 18th, there was a very sort of interesting thing that everybody sort of overlooked. That was the New York Times, the Blumenthal article a couple days later, where he details how this thing came to be. And he refers to the fact that Leslie Kean went from New York City to Washington, and that there was a whole pile of people in the room. So it wasn't just Lou Elizondo. And I think they said there was former and present and former intelligence officers and a military contractor were in the room. And that's where you start to see that this thing was much more involved than people think it was. It was well coordinated. There was a lot of people involved. And that, as I always keep maintaining that everybody leaves out, is the fact that somebody green-lighted this whole operation to take place. Now, Semivan told my friend Melinda Leslie that it was the Pentagon. And I firmly believe, and that's my next objective, is to identify where this thing is being greenlighted. But somebody's behind this thing. It was very, very carefully orchestrated and very involved operation, this December 16th thing. This was not just something that 3 newspapers just suddenly decided all to do their first UFO story in like 40 years on the front page of the newspaper, and they all just happened to all go the same day, and nobody tried to outscoop the other person. It was very, very well done and very, very, very planned.
Well, part of that plan might well have been a little break that came my way over at my Facebook group. Gary Nolan at the time was a member, and he did a little impromptu Ask Me Anything over there about the metamaterials, which were revealed in the New York Times story. And he was nice enough to do that. And that is a pretty interesting subtopic. It's very easy to find. It basically covers up the front page. And that is it was a good starting point to get started on that aspect of things. And also there's a history behind it. Jacques Vallée has been involved in this quite heavily. Peter Sturrock going back in the day, Hal Puthoff as well. Basically what we've got is 4 scientists, Vallée, Puthoff, Sturrock, and Nolan on the record saying that they have studied and have had in their possession these anomalous alloys, and they can't, at least Sturrock in his paper from the late 90s wrote he could not figure out where the items that he had were manufactured. There's obviously some other things floating around, but that is, to me anyway, a very interesting sub-aspect, somewhat limited in the information that we have. It's gotten to the point now where I would say the proof is sort of in the pudding. They've got stuff. Let's see what they have to say when they release their stuff. We know what Vallejo said, we know what Nolan said, we know what Sturrock said, and Puthoff has already said on the record. For scientists, they think they've got something. Grant, you're sort of in a nutshell sum up of the materials aspect of all this.
Well, Valley was talking about this a little bit earlier, and so it sort of opened it up. There was a lot of
yes.
rumors started about.
Yeah, at Contact in the Desert, he did an hour-long presentation.
Yeah, and there was a lot of rumors started about Bigelow and about his, the altering his, his facilities there in Las Vegas. And I knew, and that's sort of been confirmed now, was it had really nothing to do with the fact that they suddenly moved the Roswell crash to the Bigelow Aerospace. It was basically the fact that he had to update his facilities to handle top secret SCI material in case it came his way. He needed a skiff, that he didn't have a skiff, and that's where the alterations took place in order to have that contract. So there was a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of other rumors. I'm just thinking of one other rumor that came out, and that was that a lot of people sort of ignore the Washington Post and Politico, but they were actually the big ones. It was actually the Politico that got the congressional thing going, and it was the Washington Post guy had 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And there was an interview, I think it was done by the guy from the Politico, who announced right at the word go. He was interviewed the day later by NPR, a day, 2 days later, and he basically said there was a pile of programs. And this is the latest sort of rumor that's run out, that Jeremy Corbell has said there's going to be at least 4 programs. I heard 8 programs. And this whole idea that this is not the only program, this ATIP program, and they're going to drop the bomb on this. But that was being said right on day one by the guy from Politico. And a lot of people just spent all their time watching the New York Times story. And I said, actually, in some ways, the New York Times was the last to go. They didn't put their story in their newspaper in the print edition until the Sunday morning on the 17th. And so in some ways, it was they were all the same time. But in some ways, the New York Times is the last to go. And people, I don't think, have given enough reading of the other articles that were done by the other 2 major newspapers that carried that story that day.
And the New Yorker had a lengthy follow-up. They sat down with Harry Reid. That was a good article. There were quite a few other good articles that fleshed the story out a little bit. But moving along, on day 1, the bomb drops, and on day 2, it was the easiest prediction in the world that the FOIA requests would start. There'd be an avalanche of FOIA requests. That was the easiest prediction in the world to make in terms of what's going to happen next. And one of the key stories of this is, in terms of FOIA requests, a lot of researchers ran into a brick wall, and quite frankly, they weren't too happy about it. Anybody have any comments on that?
I can make a comment. I immediately went to Damon Steer. Damon Steer was the guy who asked Hillary Clinton the UFO question when Podesta said, ask Hillary about the aliens. He was the first guy from New Hampshire to ask Hillary the question. I immediately went after him. And I said, file an FOA. Let's get you. The way this game is played, you got to get in the front of the line. And he phoned, and that's when I started to realize it's the same game they've been playing for 50 years. He comes back to me and he said, he didn't know whether he should file the FOA, how he should do it, this sort of stuff. I said, just file it. Just do what you can to file the thing. Get in the front of the line. And so he phoned the Pentagon to find out what the procedure, who he should be talking to. And he was told by the Pentagon, I can assure you, Mr. Steer, we did not release any videos. And as soon as I heard that, and he came back with that, I go, oh, they're doing the same thing again. It's this plausible deniability thing. You drop it out there, but nobody's going to confirm it. And that basically got verified by the fact that, the Washington Post used aviation, Politico used aviation, Times used aerospace, and you started to see this game where you couldn't get the documents, you couldn't get the videos, and everybody's running around bumping into each other, accusing each other of, getting the wrong name and all this kind of stuff. And it was, you drop it into the public, but you throw mud in the water while you're doing it, and everybody can't confirm that this is for real, and the story gets out.
Well, one way to get around the FOIA requests, of course, is to ask direct questions to the people directly involved. And in February, roughly 60 days after the story broke, and which was roughly 60 days after the initial To the Stars Academy rollout presentation that they did, it was Luis Elizondo was slated to appear at the UFO Congress. He was going to be there live in person, and people leading up to that were thinking, great, 60 days out, he's going to bring something. He's not going to go to the UFO Congress empty-handed, but he's going to have another bombshell for all of us. But that is not exactly what happened, is it, Grant Cameron?
Yeah, well, that's what I had heard. We had been involved with Semivan. There was a setup with Semivan. And when Melinda Leslie, my friend, she told me this interview was going to take place and what do you want to ask him and all this sort of stuff. And what he told her was that the reason that Lou didn't go to the Congress is because John Alexander had said, there's no point in you going there because you're just going to get asked a bunch of hardball questions. And when you answer them, nobody's going to believe you anyway. And so when they first started, this game of you couldn't get anybody for an interview. I know a lot of people were asking me for podcasts. Can you put me in a link with these people? And they were doing CNN and all these, but these people don't know what's going on. They would not do any, say like you or like, some of the people that are doing podcasts who are going to ask all sorts of really difficult questions. And so for the first while, they played the game where you couldn't get anybody for an interview. And that's why Lou didn't, from what I was told, Lou didn't show up, as he was basically told not to.
Yeah,
and
he got.
so
Well, he
said,
did. He did a video interview with George Knapp, where basically George ran some pre-screened questions at him. That's what actually ended up happening.
Yeah, and that's where you come into this idea: is they're embedded journalists. So I mean, they're going to certain people. So they're going to Leslie Kean. They're going to George Knapp. They're going to Jeremy Corbell and stuff, but it's other researchers they're not, or other reporters they're not dealing with, and that's what they will always do. And even with now, what you see now is they're briefing certain people. I mean, James tells a story about somebody. A friend of mine was briefed. John Burroughs talks about being briefed, that they're actually going to certain researchers and briefing them as to what's about to happen, what's going to come, and that sort of stuff. And it's that sort of carefully trying to manage the story. Do the PR thing, which I guess DeLong is part of, is how do you roll the story out without having it sort of blow up in your face?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead to July. We'll go back to chronological order. But later on in the year, in July, Elizondo was booked essentially to do the same thing at the MUFON National Conference in New Jersey. And he did show up for that. He did appear live. He did take questions, some very tough ones, including from Professor Kevin Knuth, physics professor from SUNY Albany. He took live questions. He hung in there. Any thoughts on why there might have been a change in that strategy? Because he did exactly what he said he was going to do, but then didn't at the last minute back in February for the UFO Congress. He was live and he delivered at the MUFON National Conference.
Well, I can make one comment and let other people answer it. He was pulled, though. The story you may not know is that they were going to do a fundraiser event at MUFON, and he was pulled like a couple of minutes before this thing began. Tom DeLonge phoned up and said, we're not going to do a pay-to-play, and he's to be pulled. He's not to do this thing. And they said, well, it's really got nothing to do with To the Stars. It's just a fundraiser for MUFON. And that event he did not attend. So there still was some control over who he talked to and what he said.
Got it. Then so additional time passed, and in March, out comes an opinion piece from Christopher Mellon, former Undersecretary of Defense, and also working for the To the Stars Academy now. He writes a very lengthy piece in the Washington Post, and also simultaneously with all that, an additional third video comes out, the Go Fast video. And does anyone have any thoughts on the Mellon piece and everything around that?
Well, what if Mellon points in his Washington Post article is that multiple U.S. agencies are not acting concerned or taking the subject of unidentified aircraft seriously enough. And he also says there is no Pentagon process for synthesizing all the observations the military is making, which are all great points. However, I do think it's possible the Pentagon does take these kinds of things seriously regarding unidentified aircrafts.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
Yeah, but they don't share their concerns or data with every U.S. department. In other words, unless you're in their circle of the need to know, air quotes here, then you don't need to. The U.S. government has a history of having undisclosed top secret departments that other U.S. departments are and have been unaware of. This kind of coveting of information by the Pentagon has happened for decades now. I realize Elizondo used to run a Pentagon intelligence program that examined the evidence of anomalous aircraft, but whatever intel they gathered may have ended up in one of those clandestine, surreptitiously run government agencies. One of those top secret departments run by the U.S. Naval Intelligence is Area 51, where I believe they would actively take part in taking any intelligence gathered part and parcel and use it for some of the defense technology and aircrafts we see today. I just want to continue on here. Again, I think if the U.S. government takes the time to build these teams to monitor not only our airspace for threats of any kind, they would most probably have a department dedicated to actively researching and compiling evidence for unidentified aircrafts. I just don't think Mellon was privy to all of these top secret government agencies. It's just a guess. Otherwise, for example, what is Area 51 for? Supposedly to gather technology we don't understand the physics of.
Got it. And the Go Fast video came out. Dave, earlier in the show, you had mentioned some of the controversy surrounding that. Why don't you tell us your opinions on that Go Fast video?
Yeah, and just circling back to Chris Mellon, one of the things that I thought immediately was like, okay, who is this guy? And then I was like, oh, he's the former United States Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and then later for Security and Information Operations. So you would think that he would be the guy that kind of had the inside scoop. And he was almost pleading frustration, saying that nobody wants to be the alien guy in the national security bureaucracy. Nobody wants to get ridiculed, and it has a serious and recurring impediment to progress. It's time to set aside the taboos and instead listen to the pilots and radar operators. It was almost like he was pleading with his former colleagues to, come on, let's take this seriously for once. And I don't know if that's the actual, overall feeling within that office, but it seemed to be from that article. So that was my little take on it. Now, Go Fast, that was the one that was released by To the Stars, correct? That wasn't released in the initial.
Well, it got out the same day that the Mellon story came out. Who actually releases these? And to me, I haven't, to be honest with you, followed that closely. I rely on you guys to fill me in on all those details. To me, the proof is in the pudding.
I think so. I think that one was the one that was kind of first broadcast on their website, on their community of interest website. And the initial people that were looking at it, I mean, there was a lot of the debunkers, like
Mick West was saying it was a parallax effect, and he thought it was a bird.
Mm-hmm. Right. He thought it was a bird or some type of balloon. And there's a surprising lack of information in these FLIR videos. It's very, very difficult to do the image analysis and try to figure out the actual position of the jet, the speed of the jet, and then doing the math and to actually come up with the size and space of this object they're seeing. From what I gather is the latest information, they believe that the jet was probably traveling at about 370 knots and on a pretty straight course, and that the Go Fast object may have been an object that could have been about 6 feet, 7 feet in length, and may have been traveling at a rate of 70 miles an hour. So while
that fits well into a bird. I mean, that could definitely be a big seabird.
Yeah. So, but I believe there's an acceleration that's unaccounted for, Frank. Okay. So, bird might not be able to go to that speed that fast from but again, it's not the greatest video as a proof of anything, unfortunately. I think you have to take everything else into consideration. So
right. Now, there were 2 videos released the previous December, which we've talked about. The one is tied to the Nimitz case. the other is not. And listening to the sound on that is the gimbal. The FLIR is the video tied to the Nimitz case. Unless I've got that wrong. I get those two confused sometimes. Okay,
There's audio on GoFast and audio on gimbal.
Right. And it seems to me that is the exact same voice on both of those videos. That fellow who says, "My gosh." And you believe that those two are connected to this Florida coast incident in 2015. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, not? I mean, we're pretty sure. I mean, we don't have definitive evidence of witness testimony that those two videos are from that same incident, but that's the
voice is
belief.
The same. The voice is exactly the same. It's the same guy using the same expression.
I would love to get like some kind of voice analysis expert that is used in forensic cases. That would be cool to like, if they could definitively say, "Oh, that's the same guy," because I'm not sure, but maybe it is. You know,
it sounds like it to me anyway.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One thing I want to point out, Frank, is regarding that Go Fast video. The TTSA on their website does indicate that they were the first to obtain a copy of it, but that if anybody wants to get it, they have to go ahead and file a FOIA request for it.
Okay, got it. And, it's the UFO field, so, yeah, of course we have to have some drama, always the drama. Also in March, the Gary Nolan Atacama Mummy Study was properly published. That story goes back a little ways. Initially, it got a lot of attention as a segment of Stephen Greer's serious documentary. At that time, Nolan was able to do some preliminary studies. It certainly determined that the remains were human. But I shouldn't say but. Greer basically used those preliminary findings, gave Gary about 5 minutes of his own to go through them, and that was the last that the Atacama mummy was mentioned in that movie. They sort of attacked it in bits and pieces and led up to that. And basically, Nolan said, no, it's human. It's not an alien whatsoever. But this study comes out, and Greer decides to jump all over it, starts making claims about the integrity of Stanford University and about Nolan in particular. And my understanding is there were a lot of people who were very unhappy over all that, not just Gary Nolan. They weren't happy about that at all. But Greer kind of stuck to his guns and kept ripping, and also cited that he had information, criticisms from a pioneer in DNA research from Caltech, who basically tech to death the process that they used. My feeling is there's no question in my mind it's a human being, an unfortunate a fetus that suffered all manner of apparently genetic defects. To me, there's no question about that in my mind. But Greer suddenly, even after allowing Nolan to do his presentation during the Sirius documentary, coming out and saying that is ridiculous. My feeling is that the Caltech DNA pioneer researcher was a fellow by the name of Horace Drew. He does fit the profile as far as being at Caltech, researching DNA. Also, he's pretty well left the field. He relocated to Australia and has become a crop circle researcher. He fits the profile. It seems to me like he would be the guy. I've never heard any other name put out there as possibly being a better fit for Greer's description. But that created some drama. Grant, did you have any thoughts about all that?
I'm not quite as sure about the whole analysis that you have. There was a number of things. Number one, Greer's connection to Pandolfi. I interviewed this woman from Spain who was involved when they did the DNA thing. She was talking about these live beings that people had. As you may know, the Russians had one that was on video. They had a similar being. And it goes back to this thing where all these things, they really seem to unravel. And then somebody yells hoax and everybody runs for the hills and everybody just runs on to the next story. There was 8 people on that release of that paper saying that it was a human fetus. Not all of the people agreed. And you also had the situation where there was all these rumored stories where Nolan had phoned and told the guy that claimed the 3,000 alien autopsy things that they were going to alter the numbers, that we were changing the numbers. We're putting this from what is it?
Emery Smith. Emery Smith.
Emery Smith. So Emery Smith is on that paper as well. His name's on that final release of the paper. He didn't agree with that. It's one of these things.
But Grant, Emery Smith did get a credit on it. He took the photograph of the remains. He got a photo.
My understanding is he's the one that pulled the DNA from the body in Spain.
Yes. Well, he doesn't agree with it.
It's one of these things where it's just a big controversy. And one of the things is, like with the videos, the same thing with the videos. As soon as I heard the noise, this vacuum cleaner noise, I phoned John Lear. I said, John, does they have this kind of noise in a jet if you've got a mask on, if you're sealed off? And the voice, and then Ron Pandolfi said this was done in front of a simulator. He immediately said, as soon as on December 16th, as soon as I went there, he said the video is a hoax. The whole thing's a hoax. And it's the same game that they're playing all the time is they release it. If they wanted to convince the UFO community, they would release the whole video. They would give you the stuff. They're not trying to convince the UFO community. In fact, this whole thing, as I said, the UFO community has been fired. They couldn't care less about whether you or I or anybody believes these videos. The videos are there just to impress the public. That's why they went to the New York Times and Washington Post and Politico instead of coming to the UFO community. Is they're trying to shift the swing voters in the population in order to get money from Congress. They couldn't care less what you and I. If they wanted you and I to believe the whole thing, they would actually fill in the blanks and give us all the data. They wouldn't release these little snippets of videos that have bizarre little voices on them and noise and stuff like that. To me, it's the same game they've been playing all the time. It's this sort of, you put it out, it's half true, half false. There's all sorts of little things, and the skeptics will pick up on it and jump on the story, and everybody will run away from the story, and it just sort of gets out there and bounces around, which I think is exactly what they wanted to do.
Well, Grant, you did that interview with Lear, and I didn't have it in my notes, but I'm glad you brought it up because he made a couple of points there about the slow speed of the jets, how they can top out at 1,800 miles an hour. But that is true. But every time they're off the carrier deck, they're not ramping it up to full speed. He also made some criticisms of pilots not talking that way. Dave, you're pretty well plugged into some of those guys. Did you see Lear's criticisms of the video? And what are your thoughts on all that?
You know, I haven't seen his criticism, unfortunately. I'd love to read that. You know, in my research basically involved going and trying to find other videos that are out there, other, recordings of carrier operations and so on. Most of what you find out there would be radio transmissions on their networks. And, when they're talking officially that way, they're not using that language. But it's my understanding that the intercom is what we're hearing on those videos, and that would be the interplane intercoms. It would be the pilot talking to the weapons system officer in the back. So they're much more informal. And if it could be real, I'm not saying that this wasn't some type of audio like that Grant mentioned that was made up, that if that's a real concern. But I think it's possible that was an intercom recording between two pilots that never in their wildest dreams, we're thinking, oh, this is going to be all over the world, exactly what we're saying, right now, dropping the F-bombs and so on. So,
can I ask Dave a question?
Absolutely, of course.
I want to clarify. Did those jets that took the video, did they come off the carrier or did they come off the coast? One of the stories was that the first jets went back to the carrier, and then they sent the two jets from the coast, from an Air Force base on the coast, to intercept, and they got the video.
Unfortunately, the video go fast and gimbal, it has never been, basically proven where these were taken. They just said off the east coast of the United States.
No, I'm talking about the Nimitz one.
The Nimitz one, there's no audio on that. For one thing. And then the other thing is those jets all came off of Nimitz, including the Marine Corps aviation jet with Lieutenant Kurth. He was one of the first guys on the scene. He didn't see the tic-tac. He saw the disturbance. But they were all, from my understanding and all the research I've done, they were out there doing tailored ship training, Comp2X training and during that month in November, and they all came off the Nimitz carrier.
Okay.
And moving along to April, kind of a slow month, except for one thing happened. The UFO News Network Sunday show premiered on YouTube. First week, we got off to a nice start. We had Grant Cameron on. Second week, we added to that, and we had Dave Beaty on. And I just want to say really quick here, and I think I'm speaking, I know James has said this, this has been a really huge experience for us. And thanks to both of you guys for coming on before and really making it easy for us to get started.
Well, I like to thank you because, as I think I mentioned last week or whenever we were talking, that there's always complaint in the UFO community, this thing about, there's no young people. And I think you've helped bring in a lot of young people who are on top of this whole subject, who are following it very closely. That's always a major complaint at every UFO conference is there's no young people here and there's no African Americans and it's just all these old white-haired people. And what the hell's going to happen when we're gone? And I'm glad to see all these young people who are really on top of this issue and are chasing it. And maybe we'll carry the ball once we're gone.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say thanks, Frank, for inviting me. I mean, when I started writing, posting online some of my viewpoints, and I started the group called, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Group on Facebook, there was not too many people were really listening. And I think you were one of the guys that kind of messaged me and said, hey, Dave, what you're saying is pretty interesting. That's kind of, unique. And then you followed up. So I appreciate that vote of confidence. And, I'm also, a fan of the other people that are on the show, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more, Grant. And yeah, we've got a couple rookies here on the year-end show, so that says a little something about our commitment to, getting some new voices and trying to help them get heard. And moving on to May, we had a very interesting little bit of news. Maybe one of the first more significant pieces from Paul Dean, where he revealed that in addition to this ATIP program, there was something of an umbrella organization known as OSAP, and he got that out there. And it was huge news. We got him on right away. We got him about a day and a half after that news broke, and he gave us pretty much an hour and a half, the straight scoop on all that, how he found it, what it meant, and all that. And it was a fantastic bit of news. And I know, Dave, you're familiar with this. Eric Davis was not too happy about some of the bloggers and some of the things they were saying and some of the things that they were turning up. I've got a quote here from Eric. Roger Glassel, a Swedish citizen, and Paul Dean are rank amateurs with no demonstrated professional record of success in scientific, intelligence, or forensic investigations, research into anything, much less the UFO phenomenon. Quite frankly, what Paul Dean did was he brought the goods. He basically scooped, as Grant referred to him as, the To the Stars Academy embedded reporter, George Knapp. And I say more power to Paul Dean. He had a great year, too.
One comment to that, and that goes back to my contention for 30 years, is that this thing is gradually being leaked. People have the idea that there's this evil government that's trying to cover this thing up. And Paul Dean proves that it wasn't, because he gets the phone call from the Pentagon and the guy says, I'm here to help you. You should look at this name. And even after the attack by Eric Davis, it turned out he was right, that the name that he'd been given by a leak inside the Pentagon turned out to be right. So we are getting some help from inside people who are sort of not telling you the whole story, but sort of directing you and getting you in the right direction.
And Dave,
it's amazing. It's amazing that we have some Australian guys, including Keith Basterfield as well.
Yep.
Yeah, he's cool.
Blogging on this, and when I read that, I was just kind of floored that wow, this guy has somebody on the inside that is feeding him this information. It turns out to be correct, and Keith coming up with the solicitation for the contract and so on under OSWAP.
Yeah,
you say that. So that was great. One thing that was confusing to me with Eric Davis' reaction, and I still don't get this sometimes, is he was saying that these guys that had found this were trying to smear the name of TTSA and smear the name of Elizondo and the valiant DOD military personnel. I didn't see that at all. It seemed to me more like that they were being more helpful to get some of this information out. But, I guess if it's a scripted play that somebody on the outside trying to come in and changing the release of information from that script would be viewed as some kind of adversary, I'm not sure. So
it'd be interesting to see what Davis says now, because it turned out it was right. And it was almost like I've known Eric Davis for 20 years, 15 years. Very, very sharp guy, got a security clearance, knows a lot of stuff, you and I. And it's almost like he didn't know that he wasn't aware of this thing, and he had jumped on it, that it was wrong and whatever, and it turned out it was right. It'd be interesting to see what Eric Davis has to say now about the fact that ASOP actually exists, and it was actually the superior program. ATIP was the lower program.
And right. And I guess ATIP came into existence after OSAP. From what I read, that the former program manager actually changed it or created maybe a sub-program named ATIP to more narrowly focus on the 5 observables. So that was something that I believe Keith Basterfield wrote, and I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting fact as well.
And also in May, I believe, I don't have a specific date on this, but I believe it was in May, per both Tom DeLong and David Fravor, that TTSA was running witnesses up to Congress and doing some congressional briefings. Is that about right, or am I a little off on that time frame? Grant, do you know?
Yeah, you're probably right. That's where I say that the guys from Politico started that thing. And the interesting thing about that I think maybe people have not really realized is that they're saying, okay, so you got To the Stars there, and none of these people really have, except maybe Lil Elizondo, have the security clearances. But one of the things that was made public by Nick Pope about these moves to go to Congress and to the Arms Appropriations Committee was the fact that the DIA gave a briefing to the Senate Appropriations Committee, which means there's actually this direct link that there is somebody inside the government who's actually providing material. It's not some program that leaked out. It's actually coming from the government.
And the following month, June, big news in June, the premiere of Grant Cameron's KGRA show, The Cameron Files. Grant, you had mentioned you've been actively in this since the mid-'70s. What was the big hurry getting your own interview show together?
Well, it's actually the last thing I wanted to do. It's the last thing I ever wanted to do. I hate it. I absolutely hate doing a radio show. The only reason I have is because I get situations where, like, if I got John Burroughs on, or I've got people on, you can ask questions that if you were to ask them in a private interview, they'd tell you to go to hell. But on a radio show, they actually have to tell you. So I'll do it until I've sort of run out of witnesses to talk to. But I've had a couple of good shows, but I was basically talked into it. If you know the background story, this is the last thing I wanted to do. Got
it. Also that month, an article, we'd mentioned him earlier, Professor Kevin Knuth from SUNY Albany, was basically this site, theconversation.com, sort of went to him and requisitioned a story. Hey, can you knock all this nonsense down about UFOs and ETs? And Professor Knuth went ahead and said, well, it's maybe not so crazy after all. More recently, a paper that had been published in March by NASA scientist Dr. Colombano, that came out. So we're seeing maybe not this avalanche or this giant rush of scientists being a little bit more open to this field, but we're seeing one here and one there going public and saying, yeah, I'm kind of interested in all this stuff. Chant, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just a short statement, and that is the more scientists that are involved in acting interested in the field of ufology, the more it legitimizes it. And so, it's really encouraging that Kevin Knuth, he didn't back down and shy away when somebody asked him, how do you feel about UFOs, hoping that he would deride it publicly. He actually said very publicly and in a very unafraid way, he held his stance and he said that he was actually interested. And he didn't act like he wanted to put it down or marginalize the UFO community. I'm really tired of that, by the way. Just wanted to mention it's nice to have people like Kevin Knuth out there on our side in the field of ufology. I believe the more people involved in science who pay attention to this field, the more it allows people like us to be taken seriously. The people on this panel, they have literally spent a large investment of their life working day and night to try and bring as much serious and legitimate information to the field of ufology as possible, so that people, again, who are your average UFO enthusiasts to your, from your novice to your advanced researchers, they get to become more educated regarding the finds that Grant and Dave and Twitter Jay, myself, you, James, other people, James being the co-host of this show, and other people who are iconic or not well known, they get to educate the public. I think it's important that more scientists actually stand up like Kevin Knuth and say, yes, you know what, it is okay to say that there is a possibility that there is life out there. It's a mathematical probability. So I don't need to rant here, but it's just nice to have.
And Jay, I know that that's one of your areas that you take a real particular interest in, trying to gin up scientific papers on the subject on those occasions when scientist does decide to get involved. Tell us a little bit about your feelings of some of these scientists becoming a little bit more public with their approval of looking at the UFO topic.
Yeah, well, I think it's been something that's been looked into for a while by scientists. You look at the Society for Scientific Exploration, which has been going for about 40 odd years or 30 odd years, something like that. But they've been looking into it quite seriously for quite some time. I don't think it's really on many people's radars. But if you look at the papers and the journals and stuff that they've released, they're looking at consciousness, they're looking at UFOs, they're looking at crash materials. All of this stuff is included in these journals. But there's loads and loads of scientists that are getting involved now. It's really, really important, and it's legitimizing it. And that's the most important thing, really. We need scientific exploration of these items because without that, it's just speculation. We need to have that objective truth behind it rather than just pure subjectivity of witness testimony and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, really, really, really important. There's loads and loads of papers available. You search around the internet, you find papers on all manner of things. Consciousness, obviously, is a very primary thing at the moment. So, yeah, very, very important. Loads and loads of scientists getting involved at the moment.
Got it.
Frank, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
In terms of not so much scientists, but in terms of, because I spent a lot of time with the government people. One of the other thing that changed with not just scientists, but government people. So, and the prime example was Billy Cox, who I've known since the 1980s, and he's written this lonely UFO blog every week for many, many years. He said his editor just basically tolerates it. He tells the story after the TSA release. Before they have this event that happens in Florida where he's a reporter there, where the CIA guy comes down and
Grant, you're dropping off. Grant, you dropped off.
Yeah, I think I don't see him.
We lost him? Hang on a sec.
Yeah, I think the aliens took him. I'm not sure.
All right.
He got abducted during the show. Live abduction.
So, Grant's on the call. Grant, you still there? All right. What he's done in the past is he is called back. We had some issues with him when we had him on Premiere Week. So let's move forward. This is something actually as we go forward, hopefully Grant gets back to us. But as we move forward, we've got basically stuff that the remaining panel can go into some detail on. We've got in July, George Knapp. As I was saying earlier, it's. If the FOIA requests don't work, you got to kind of get your questions in when you can. And as Grant had mentioned, George is a bit of a embedded reporter with the To the Stars Academy. And what he did was a little AMA online over at Coast to Coast. And I wanted to jump on that opportunity to get the question that I wanted to have answered right from the get-go. The first and well, not the first, but the biggest UFO case that took place while the ATIP program was operational was the Stephenville case in Stephenville, Texas, back in 2008. And basically what I wanted to ask him was, did he know if ATIP investigated the Stephenville case at all? And he confirmed that they did. It might have been OSAP, not necessarily ATIP, but that case was investigated. And it's good to know that. And obviously, we all want to follow up with somebody who might know a little bit more about that, namely Louis Elizondo, who's made himself available for some questions. But as far as I know, he's never been asked that specific question. And I would certainly like to know more about that case. Does anybody here, I doubt it, but does anybody here like that Stephenville case as much as I do?
This is Dave. I think it's a great case.
Yeah, it's a great case.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one here. The one comment that I have, and I know Robert Powell, I mean, he's the guy that really investigated that, boots on the ground. He talked to all the witnesses. He really knows that case. And in fact, it was the last case in the United States where they were able to FOIA the raw FAA radar data, and it allowed them to look at these raw blips on the radar from air traffic control in that area that showed every single return, and it didn't just show aircraft with transponders. And of course, until UFOs start using transponders, they wouldn't show up there. But what happened is that the FAA and I guess the government saw that they were able to look at this specific data in relationship to Bush's home there in Texas, right? Isn't that correct? And after that,
one county
they came out with a law that basically prevents from now on, you cannot FOIA that raw radar data as a national security concern. So,
and just to point out what that Powell and Glenn Schultz MUFON report indicated was one of those radar returns was traveling at a speed of about 2,000 miles an hour and had in diameter was about 500 feet across. So they changed the law, and that was the information that they went with in their report. And all that's available over at my website, so you can go check it out and read the whole thing if you want to. It's like 80 pages long. It's a huge report, but that's really the key finding, I think. And also, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to ask you, Elizondo, so he said that the program did indeed investigate that case.
No. That was Knapp. That was Knapp who was saying that. And what I'm saying is the follow-up questions, I think, at this point need to go to Elizondo. That's what I'm saying.
Right, because, there was just confirmation but no details about what they found then.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Or even specifically who looked at it. He said it might have been OSAP. If that's the case, then Elizondo might not have looked at it at all. But again, you still got to ask the question. You want to run something like this down, I think you do anyway. And,
right. And when you look at OSAP, you have to go back to the beginning there where you find out that that contract, that solicitation from Defense Intelligence Agency was awarded to Bigelow, who then had field investigators. So, they were running as a subcontractor for this program, and then they did indeed have guys that were sent out all over the place to investigate UFO cases. So. Yep.
And just another point, Robert's been pretty negative and very dismissive of that claim from Knapp, very skeptical of it, feeling that, he was on the ground. He talked to every witness. He didn't see anybody from the government running around and talking to folks. But I know that case. I think those ground witnesses are great. Constable Gaitan, Ricky Sorrell, Steve Allen. There was also an officer who didn't want to go on the record who saw something, a police officer in the center of town there. And despite all that, if you're a government investigator, why do you want to go talk to those people when it's quite possible that you're able to talk to the David Fravor of this case? Because a lot of people were talking about scrambled aircraft. you would have essentially David Fravor being the pilot, his analog in this particular case, or the analog of a Kevin Day, a radar operator in this particular case, if they were also able to pick up this anomalous radar target. So I think just because Robert didn't see anything doesn't mean it didn't happen. I think that if they did send government investigators, and I don't have any reason to believe that they don't, I think Knapp is a good source on this. I certainly believe it. And again, you would talk to the military people in the area if you were sending them out. So no, Robert Powell wouldn't have crossed paths with them because they're not talking to the local ground witnesses as great as they are. They've got military witnesses they can talk to, and that's who they would have talked to. So, okay. All right. And then in August, Twitter user Jay, found some documents at Christopher Mellon's website, and just go ahead, tell that whole story, Jay, because I think, how did you even know to look there?
Well, there was no real indication or anything like that. It was just pure chance, I guess you could say. So I was looking into
nothing wrong with beginner's luck, Jay. Nothing at all.
Exactly right. I think that's all it can be brought down to, really. So I was just looking into Chris Mellon on the day. Obviously, I knew him from TTSA. So I just watched an interview of his that morning. So just started to look around. I saw he had a Twitter account and a link to his website. So basically clicked on that link, went over there, had a little rummage around. It had different sections. It had security, defense, all of this kind of stuff in different sections, and they all of the URLs for each of these different parts had a different numeric value. So one started off as 1, which might be in security, defense might be number 2. Then I realized there was a miscellaneous section as well. It was listed, there was a link there present on the website, and I think it might have had a 0 numeric value in the URL. So I went over to the miscellaneous section, and I see a presentation or a set of PowerPoint slides, something like that, actually for ATIP. So I tweeted some of those, and I realized there were a couple more links within that miscellaneous section, one of which had Llewellyn's on those resignation letter. And we had the actual videos themselves, so the original versions of those videos, which are only about 8-9 megabytes in size, something like that. And also the limits unredacted report. So basically, I just posted some of that stuff to Twitter and created a little bit of a storm. But there's nothing really outstandingly interestingly about it, apart from the fact, I managed to have a good rummage around the website. When I spoke to people about it afterwards, they seemed to imply that it was locked or there was a password or something like that. But I did not experience that when I tried to access his website. And I think people...
go ahead. Finish up, please.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think, once I posted it, everyone else seemed to be able to access it fine as well. So, yeah, it seemed like it was available for a few days.
And Chant had mentioned earlier that one of the things that turned up there was a document that specifically identified the female pilot, not Dave Fravor, but the other pilot was a female. That's something that Dave had from way back in the day. But she wanted to stay anonymous. She wanted no part of any publicity surrounding all this. That information was in there. You held back on that information, Jay, and kudos for you, to you for that. I want to second that.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a few other pilots in there as well, so it wasn't just.
Wanted to say that I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say that I think that shows a lot of honor and integrity on your part, not having revealed the female pilot's background, her information, her name. That's really, really very important that you didn't do that. It's funny. People expect journalists to reveal everything. That's sometimes a stereotype, but actually what you did was important regarding what you didn't do. And so I just really commend you for that.
Thank you very much. I do need to be 100% honest about it. Yeah. So initially I posted the ATIP presentation. I also posted a couple of images from the Nimitz incident as well, which I think did initially have some of those names, but somebody... UFO Joe, in fact, just dropped me a note to say, could you remove them? I don't think she's
Joe Merger.
Just drop off.
But also, wouldn't it be fair to say on your behalf that there was probably an immense amount of data to go through, right? So.
Oh, absolutely. I think,
Yeah.
when you find these kind of stuff on a website, it's overwhelming to come across this kind of stuff anyway.
Right.
And you're just kind of digesting all of the information. You know what I mean? I didn't have any kind of followers at the time on Twitter, so I just thought, I'm just going to post this stuff, see what happens. And obviously, it's not available.
The question I have for you is, did your jaw drop when you realized that you had valuable information that nobody had really stared at, that had just basically been overlooked? Were you actually astounded when you came across some extremely interesting data?
Yeah, I was surprised it was on the website at all, in all honesty.
Yeah.
So it was also an image. So, going to all the different parts of the miscellaneous part of the website, there was actually an image that had 4 discs, so 4 CDs. They're actually listed as CDs. They weren't DVDs, they weren't Blu-ray or anything like that. And also a photograph of a package. Part of those CDs said that they were, basically had come from the Pentagon. So it's, it kind of legitimizes some of the information that was part of those releases from TTSA as well. But very surprised that it was available. I'm surprised I was the first person to find it, but
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a fantastic find that kudos to you. You did such a wonderful job.
And
I have a quick comment as well.
I think I know where you're going to go. Okay, go. I was going to ask you about this. I think.
First of all, I just wanted to say that the website is gone now. It was, I think, globalsecurityissues.com, something like that. And when you had first posted the link, many of us went there and checked it out and tried to make heads or tails of why these documents were there. What possibly use could it be to have this specific collection of documents? And the only thing I could ever surmise was this was used in some type of high-level briefings with people that had clearances and so on.
And people who knew the link sort of used it as maybe a share folder or something along those lines.
Yeah. Maybe it was part of a PowerPoint or something like that he was doing. I think there was a PowerPoint slides in the folder. One of the interesting things was Luis Elizondo's resignation letter, which some people had asked for previously, that said, we want proof that this guy did work for, defense intelligence and so on, and we want to see his resignation letter. So there it was. A part that you might have just been foreshadowing was that some of the names that we had previously thought were accurate, because there was some confusion in the beginning. If you look at some of the first news reports about some of these, specifically the Nimitz case, the pilots' names were listed as Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Slate, and so it was reported over and over and over that these were the 2 pilots. I had done some research that indicated that one of the pilots was actually a female, and I did not actually know her name. I had some suspicions, but none of the primary witnesses had mentioned who this person was. In fact, as Chant said, they told me that this pilot does not want to go on the record. She's still active duty and doesn't want to be named. And so I had reported this, on some of the social media, and I got a lot of flack for that. They said, no, you're completely wrong. It was Lieutenant Commander Slate was the second pilot. He was the wingman of that flight of jets.
And he was in fact was it Fravor's weapons systems officer, or was it the lady pilots?
It was the lady. He was, based on this research that Jay had uncovered and this information. It sort of painted that picture of okay, now we know who is in what jet, and none of us were interested in outing anybody or using any names. This was a very personal, sensitive information on that document. It said so right at the top: personal, sensitive information not to be released. So we just kind of buried it all. But it was nice to see that I was right about that one fact. So thanks, Jay. Appreciate that.
No worries.
And from there, we get on towards the latter part of the year. It hasn't been as busy, certainly, as the first half. Some interesting things happened. Hunt for the Skinwalker was released in September. In October, DeLong and Elizondo went to Italy. We've covered a lot of this in excruciating detail in early roundtables, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. The TTSA financial statement came out. Anybody have any comments on all that? at all? Is anybody interested in whether or not Tom DeLonge's going to be able to keep a roof over his head?
I think they actually post their financial information on their website. I think what they're trying to do right now is ask for donations from different states. And they also post basically reports indicating the money they have received. So they've made it very public. They haven't tried to hide anything. They're very transparent.
Yeah, I think it took a while. They weren't immediately able to solicit investments in a couple of states, and that kind of came along later. But in general, their money worries are their money worries. I'm not that concerned about it. I think it's basically all about cash flow. That initial fundraiser for the $2 million that kept them going, and now they've got TV deals, which we haven't gone into too much, but they've got TV deals and the pre-production costs or development costs. That's going to provide some cash flow for them as well. Running any kind of organization, I don't care if it's for profit or not for profit, it's all about the cash flow, and I think they're going to be fine.
One thing I wanted to mention, it might be kind of a boring detail, but it's still important to note that the To the Stars Academy is a public benefit corporation. And what that means basically is, for example, a public benefits corporation, that is usually a corporation created by the government that performs a specific function for the benefit of the public, such as a public library or adult day center. But more broadly, a public benefit corporation can mean any corporation created for a charitable purpose. So though these are usually called nonprofit organizations, this is basically a charitable corporation called a public benefit corporation. So you can give them money so they can keep going. That sounds a little boring, but it's important that people know that's what they're called.
It's all about the cash flow.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess, one other comment was there was some misunderstanding about the SEC report that people jumped on that showed $37 million of debt. And so there were some reports that said, oh, look, these guys are that far in the red. But there was some later corrections to that and explanations. In fact, To the Stars came out with an explanation kind of chastising that one report, saying, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't put this in print as news because you don't know what you're talking about. And they kind of explained what those numbers meant. And indeed, it was sort of, okay, I get it. It's complex financial stuff that, is kind of boring, but it made sense after you read that. So.
Got it. And then in November, mid-November, November the 14th, the release of the long-awaited documentary from Dave Beaty, The Nimitz Encounters. Dave, I know you put countless hours into all this. Finally, it came out. Tell us a little bit about that process. We had some rough cuts back in April, and the finished product was just fantastic. Tell us all about it. I think you ended up with a lot more than you were expecting to have back in April, including some expert voiceovers in there.
Yeah, I've been a television producer for my entire career. I started as a news journalist, and by the way, I'm kind of interested in learning about this embedded journalist. I'm not that familiar with that embedded journalist, but that's an interesting concept. But anyways, the film project started out, of course, with the New York Times article, and I read that and saw the interviews that were done. And I started thinking, wow, this would be great to do a visual representation, a recreation of this. And how can I pull that off? And I thought, well, I don't really have any money, but I can do the editing, and I probably could do some computer graphics that would simulate the jets. I have some, background experience in doing CGI. So by taking those elements and then taking of course, the story, and I also had done some documentaries for like History Channel and PBS in the past, where I know the track to get footage from the U.S. government through the National Archives, for instance. And in this case, a lot of it was from the Defense Visual Information Center. And most U.S. defense footage of warships and planes and jets and all of that is public domain. So I was able to get footage of, for instance, the USS Nimitz and the Princeton underway. By combining all those elements, to create a recreation of this event, turned out to be about 17 minutes in the end. And it was a great experience. I mean, I worked on it after work, and, I'd come home and let the computer render overnight. I think I started the process back in January or February of this year. One of the great things is, like, I don't have money to fly around to try to interview some of these primary witnesses. I have the camera equipment, but it's kind of expensive and takes me away from my day job. So I reached out to the Stars. They have a press inquiry contact page on their website. So I think it was actually Gary Nolan that said that I should do that. So I reached out to them and I explained that I was making this little movie, that it was going to be, given to people for free. I wasn't going to charge a pay-per-view type, or theatrical or anything like that. And that I wouldn't use the entire thing. I was just going to use some excerpts from it. And a couple weeks went by and I didn't hear anything. And then I get an email from Carrie DeLong, I guess that's Tom's sister, saying that, yeah, as long as, I don't charge for it and I, give them credit, that it's okay if I use it for free or whatever without charging. So then that gave me that aspect of it, a interview of a primary witness to go along with those other two elements that I mentioned. And you see the results right now on YouTube.
We talked a little bit about it, but the million views, I don't know if there's any other UFO dedicated video on YouTube with that many views. It would have to be pointed out to me. I don't remember ever seeing a number quite that high. Chant, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's really important for people to know that Dave worked very hard on that film. And, after only 3 weeks, there were 1 million views on it almost. And that's just incredible. Also wanted to mention that some of Dave's films have been featured on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, and PBS nationally. I had the privilege and honor of actually being able to interview Dave. And it was really a eye-opening interview, having the opportunity to learn more about him and find out how he feels about the topic of ufology and other subjects also additionally. So thank you for that, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. It was really fun, because not only creating the film, but being able to engage the community and ask questions. Everyone was very supportive of the project, and I was able to provide updates as I went along and so on. And it was really cool, I think, to look at some of the documents and listen to the interviews. One of my friends has a amazing website on OmniTalk Radio. Giuliano, yeah, with pretty much every single news report that ever took place on this ATIP subject. And I was able to listen to all the interviews and compare them. So you might have one of the pilots giving an entire account of the Nimitz encounters, and another pilot and radar operators and so on. And by combining them all together into one timeline, I think that I got it pretty accurate based on the witnesses. There's some things that are wrong. I know, like there's a couple, things that were unclear about the direction of the travel or the exact altitude, and if it was a girl that was on the radio asking about the weapons, if it was a guy. So there's some discrepancies that are small and minor. So what I try to do is kind of, if it was a guy or a girl, I put both a female radio operator and a male radio operator.
And you brought in some ringers. You had some help in terms of bringing that dialogue up to more credibility. Tell us how you were able to bring in Kevin Day, who is the radio operator on the Princeton, who's come forward. Tell us all about that.
Sure. I guess listeners to this podcast get to know that there's some Easter eggs in the film. And one is that in the beginning, when the recreation starts, you hear some radio operators, and one is called Charlie, and he is talking to a E2 Hawkeye. And that pilot or radio operator is on the radio called Banger. Well, these are two of the primary witnesses that were on USS Princeton in the Combat Information Center that day in November when this whole incident went down. They were, seeing the radar screens. They were hearing the pilots on the talkback radios in the combat, and they were hearing the intercepts. And so these were the guys that were there. And I just asked them, hey, you want to be in my film? You can do some radio, dialogue. And they're like, sure. So we set up a conference call, and I'm like, I don't need to go all the way to Oregon where Kevin lives. I can just put him on a speaker phone, and it almost sounds like a radio. And same with Gary, who, we kind of had fun that day creating that little dialogue. And then, I got my wife to do one, and one of my other buddies, he came in and did one of the other pilots. So it was all done, without having to spend a great deal of money. And it was a lot of fun as well. And by the way, at the end of the film, I say, if you have any information about witnesses to UFO sightings from military ships or planes, give us an email, give us a shout out on this email. So I put an email address on the film, and I've probably gotten over 100 emails.
Really?
Yeah, I've gotten,
wow.
I have witnesses that go all the way back to the 50s. They're like, hey, I was on an Air Force base in 1950, whatever, and I'll tell you the sighting I had. It's very interesting. So now I have this I could write a book. I have a whole collection of probably untold UFO stories. But I have 3 that are from the Nimitz encounters. And these are guys that have not been heard of before. No one knows their names. And they're very interesting. And I can share them with you guys if you want to hear about it.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Of course we want to hear about them. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll start out with one that's like, I'll go from, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll start around 5, and then the last one will be like the good one. Okay. So the first witness, his name is Jason Turner. If he's listening, I told him I was going to say his name out there, and he was okay with it. He was on the USS Princeton, November 2004. And he wasn't like in the Combat Information Center sitting behind a radar screen. Actually, he worked like in the ship's store and medical department, as like a petty officer, I guess. But of course, everybody on that ship knew what was going on that next day or whatever.
Right.
And he had a buddy that worked in I guess it would be in one of the intel spaces on the ship. He was like a cryptographic technician, something like that. And he invited Jason, and he's like, hey, you got to see this video because we have it on our console. So he had clearance to go into that area of the ship, and it was called the SSES, the Ship's Signal Exploitation Space, where these consoles were that they used for, I guess, storing intel. And he showed him this FLIR video, and it is the video that we have a copy of, but Jason says that the video he saw, first of all, was much higher quality, much higher resolution. And he said that it was much longer. The video that we have is about 1 minute, 17 seconds. And the one he saw was 7 to 10 minutes in length. And I said, well, was there anything, cool on it? Or is it just this white blob in the center of the screen like what we have? And he said, no. He goes, this thing was being chased by the jet, and it did a 90-degree turn, which you could see. And he said it just took off like hypersonic out of the frame, as part of this thing. I go, well, is that in the video that we have? He goes, no, you don't see that in the FLIR video we have, but it was on this original one that he saw. So, somewhere that's out there, this 10-minute FLIR video. And I asked him, I go, well, did you see anybody come onto the ship, or were you asked not to talk about this? He said, no, they weren't ever told not to talk about it. He said that when the ship docked after, that training, I guess, in San Diego, when they came back to port, he said that guys came on board in plain clothes and secured all the data from the ship, all the radar and everything, and took it away. So that was like the last he saw of it. And he didn't know I don't think he knew who these guys were aside from the officers that were part of the Navy. So that's one interesting story. And Jason's out there, and, he doesn't mind having his name used and so on. So, okay, the next. Any questions, by the way?
No, keep going.
Okay, next one. And
Chant,
again, these all came through the email that I had set up on at nimitzencounters.com. So the second guy was on the USS Nimitz, and he was in the Wall Bangers Squadron. This is the E-2 Hawkeye early warning.
The radar plane.
Yeah, the one you've seen in my film, Banger, with a giant round radar dish sitting on top of it. Okay. They normally control the fighter jets when there's missions going on. They get up high and they can see everything. So they're sort of like a air traffic control in the sky. Well, this guy was on there. He was an avionics technician, and his job was when these planes landed, they would do maintenance on the planes, but his job was to secure and remove part of the avionics, are these hard drives. He said that they record the radar tracks on. I guess it's kept as a copy. And on that day, when that particular mission came back in that E-2 Hawkeye, I guess the one in my film, or one of them, landed. The plane was sitting there for like 20 minutes, and they were taking these hard disks off. The skipper or the commanding officer came up, and he said, "There's some guys here that are going to take that material. So, we need to get those hard drives." And he says that there were like 2 Air Force officers or 2 United States Air Force personnel that had landed on Nimitz that morning or that afternoon, and they were there to take these hard drives off of this E-2 Hawkeye. And he saw them take them, and they confiscated these hard drives, and then they were gone. So I had never heard that. I said, "You sure these were United States Air Force on a Navy carrier?" He's like, "Yep." He goes, "They stood out like a sore thumb." I said, "Well, I've heard of, the OSI or whatever, so perhaps he's correct." I mean, I would assume, and by the way, I can't 100% verify these guys because I didn't go and see their ID but I did go to the USS Nimitz cruise book and look them up, and sure enough, they're, that they claimed to be these guys, and I'm looking at their picture, and there's their name. They were on the ship, and that's their job. So, unless I get that DD whatever form, I'm, just gonna have to go with it and say, yeah, I'm pretty sure they're telling me the truth, and they're not just pulling my leg. Okay, so the last one, this witness, this is pretty cool. He was a radar officer with the Wall Bangers Squadron. So he flew in the Hawkeye. And both of these last 2, they don't want their names mentioned, at least at this point. So they're anonymous. This guy was just a radar officer. He says that they were up there and he heard the jets, Fravor and Slate and Kirk and all these guys on the radio. He heard the weapons loadout and these intercepts. And he said that it was kind of scary because they didn't know if there was hostile intent, what was going on. So it was a very tense day. And he was kind of glad that no casualties resulted in any of this stuff. But he said that he and the crew saw the Tic Tacs, that on this Hawkeye, he said that this craft he says it transited very quickly. And then for a second, he said it joined up on their Hawkeye. I'm not sure if that meant off the wing or whatever, and then it took off for 2 or 3 seconds. So he said that everybody on that plane saw the Tic Tac. And so finally the mission's over and they're coming back, they're called back to the carrier to come into trap on the carrier. And over the radio, they're told to sit there and not to turn off the motor. And he said that means it's called a hot pump. He said that their engines are running. In a combat situation, I guess they would sometimes refuel the plane as it just sits there on the deck and then take off again or something. He said it was very unusual in this situation to be asked to sit there with the engines running. He said, okay, after 20 minutes, they were given the order to, turn off the engines and come out. They were met there on the deck by their CO or their skipper or whatever, and a couple of other individuals, and they were told to follow them downstairs into some secure area on the carrier. When they got into the secure area, they began individually briefing these guys, and they told them, "No, you didn't see anything. This did not happen." And they had them sign, affidavits or NDAs or something. So he's saying, he had to sign something that he would not discuss this incident. He said after that, they were led back to their ready room. And when they got back, another unusual thing, they were told that they were not going to debrief the mission, which was something that they always did. They would talk about safety issues or post-flight call-outs. In this case, they weren't even allowed to talk about the flight at all. And so, he was told this didn't happen. And he said after he saw my film, he was like, this is like the first time in, 14 years that I was able to look at that and go, you know what? It's great to see that, because for all these years, I was really starting to think maybe it really did not happen. So there's 3 brand new one primary and a couple other witnesses that saw all this stuff, to sort of vindicate and even further bolster this as a real, very unexplained case,
I think it's a top 10 all-time case, just because of who's involved and the hubbub that surrounded it. I'm big on hubbub, so I think it's a top 10 case. Go ahead, Chant.
I do. I wanted to ask Dave regarding your Nimitz Encounters film. If anybody were to take anything away from your film without really giving, away too much, what would you say is one of the most important things somebody can gain from watching it?
I would say that, and again, if I look at the comments in the video, and these are probably people that aren't into UFOs, they might look at it just because it's on a popular list or something in their feed. And they'll say, this didn't happen. This is not real. This is BS. There is no way that this really happened. I see in the beginning of a disclaimer saying that it's not presented as fact. And my reply is, no, it did happen. You can look at these links to the New York Times article. You can look at this interview that this commanding officer of a fighter squadron, his statements, the corroborating witness statements. It did happen. It's just unexplained. I'm not saying that these white objects are aliens from another planet. I'm just saying that we don't know what they are. And I don't think the military knows either, but maybe they do. I don't know. When you have people telling, radar technicians that, hey, you didn't see anything, don't ever talk about this, I'm not sure why they would do that. But I think the biggest takeaway I would say is, yeah, it did happen. I don't think we know why or what they are yet. So.
Well, and that's a really important point you made regarding sort of the unexplained physics of something going so fast. You don't really know what they are. You can't really say, oh, that was an extraterrestrial craft, but there was an unidentified craft that was going at speeds that are beyond what we are capable of.
Especially from a dead hovering start.
And it's not just somebody's eyeballs. The USS Princeton and the Aegis system, the Spy-1 radar, is probably one of the most advanced radars we have on a naval platform. George Knapp likes to say you could see a golf ball at 100 miles or something like that. These things can spot submarine, the mast or something sticking out of the water, an antenna from a submarine sticking out of the water. They probably could see that from miles away. So it's a very sophisticated radar. And Kevin Day says that they were tracking these things coming in from above the height of the scan volume, they call it, 60 to 80,000 feet up in the atmosphere, dropping to the surface of the water in less than 1 second, which would put the speed at, like 15,000 miles an hour or something like that, it defies physics. So I don't know. I'm not sure do we have some technology like that? I guess Bob Lazar would say, sure, we have it, but I don't have the proof of that. So I don't know what they are. But this event did happen, and many people saw that, and, it's unexplained.
And radar is physical evidence. I can't drive that home enough. I've spoken to a couple of physicists. We're on the same page on that. Professor Sturrock and Professor Knuth. I asked both of them specifically. Radar is physical evidence. A lot of people run around and say, "Oh, where's the evidence?" Radar. That's the evidence.
Well, unfortunately, according to the Hawkeye technician, the U.S. Air Force came and took the radar data and confiscated it. So.
Well, I didn't say it was easy to get. I just say it is.
Yeah.
And of course, as we spoke about earlier, they changed the law regarding FOIA requests and radar. So there's all that. Well,
yeah,
we're gonna wrap things up. We've got a good hour and 3/4, and I think we reviewed the year pretty thoroughly. We lost Grant somewhere early along the way. Weren't able to pick him back up. But he was able to make some key contributions early on. The latter part of the year was a lot from Jay and Dave, regardless, and a lot of stuff that we already covered in recent roundtables pretty well. We took all the meat off of those bones within the last few weeks, so not going to repeat ourselves on that. I'm going to wrap things up. And I want to go around the horn and thank everybody for joining us. Thanks, Grant Cameron. If you're listening, sorry we lost you there. But really, oh, yeah, Grant, you're back. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Okay.
Your big scoop. It was good.
Yeah. So, Grant, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for coming on for a third time now, and also helping us promote the show with links over on your Facebook pages. Thanks again so much. You've been a huge help to us, and I can't appreciate your early Christmas present to us enough.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate being on. I appreciate being with these young people who have got things under control, I think.
We're working on it. It's a work in progress. Chant, Hannah, thanks so much for coming on again for a second time. I'm sure we'll be having you back on in the future. I think maybe some scoops might be coming your way if you stay on it. Thanks again, Chant.
Thank you. And scoops will be coming your way. We already discussed that. I also wanted to congratulate you and James, your co-host, for a fantastic year. And there's more to come for next year. So I'm really excited about all your guests next year.
You better believe it. Can't say this is going to be our last show. It is as far as I'm concerned, but you never know with James. He might pull a rabbit out of his hat, and we might get one more thing going. I can assure you all, if we do, it'll be a big one. Twitter Jay, thanks for coming on again, my friend. You were awesome again, as always. I'm sure you're going to be back, too. No doubt about that in my mind, with some more spectacular finds for us.
Yeah, no worries. I'm happy to come on anytime to speak about any of the kind of stuff that I'm putting up. Great. Thanks for the invite, and speak next year probably.
Yep, absolutely. And again, Dave Beaty, I know we want to do more with your work, and I know you've recommended Christoph Spitzer as a person that we should get more in touch with. I'm sure that's going to happen. Things do happen as far as getting these shows on the road, but believe me, I have not forgotten about that tip. And thanks for all that you've done for our show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I really appreciate the invite on your show. I mean, I listened to it. Being part of the discussion is humbling to me, to be, amongst these people. And I'd just like to, taking your time to put together this for the listeners out there.
Absolutely.
And I hope 2019 is just as big as 2018 for this topic.
Yeah, though there was a lot of complaining over the course of the year, but in between all the complaining, we did turn up some good stuff. We know more about UFOs today than we did this time last year, and that's always a good thing. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. Everybody, thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas to everybody. I'm going to close out the show with a little bit of audio from 50 years ago, this coming New Year's Eve. The Apollo 8 astronauts sent their Christmas greetings back to planet Earth. I'm going to play that. It was big for me. I remember watching this very video. Well, it's not a video; it's an audio. But I remember watching this moment as it unfolded, sitting at home as an 8-year-old kid, just blown away by it. So I'm going to close. Go to astronaut Frank Borman. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to need to ask everybody to be a little quiet while this little snippet plays. But our holiday greetings to you. Merry Christmas to everybody, and a Happy New Year.
Happy holidays, everybody.
We close good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you.